It started like a duel in the heat. Real Madrid and Juventus, two European giants, both trying to pretend the Club World Cup wasn't something to sweat over, and then sweating anyway, literally and metaphorically, in the sun-blasted Miami stadium. You could see it on their faces in the first 5 minutes. Not fear, not nerves, just wariness. Like two boxers eyeing each other in the opening round, arms up, waiting to see who flinches first. And in that first half, nobody really flinched. Nobody did anything all that brave. They just circled. You had Juventus starting with confidence, strutting around like they'd already read the script. Kolo Muani and Yildiz looked like they'd been handed the keys to something dangerous early on. That 8th-minute counterattack, chef's kiss. Trent Alexander-Arnold coughed up the ball like a guy tripping on the last step of the stairs, and suddenly Kolo Muani was charging down the field with blood in his eyes. Yildiz played the flick of the match, honestly. That little touch behind him into space? Beautiful. Kolo Muani tries to dink Courtois because he's feeling himself, right? But the execution's off by a whisper, and it just lands on the roof of the net. Inches from brilliance. Inches from humiliation. Real Madrid let out a collective breath they didn't know they were holding. Real were late to the party. They brought the snacks. They brought the drinks. But for a good chunk of the first half, they just stood in the kitchen awkwardly. Valverde was probably the only one who walked through the door with music playing behind him. He was on it. Ran himself into exhaustion before we even hit minute 20. He tried one from distance, missed, but it had venom. He meant it. And Real needed that, because otherwise Juventus were doing the better job of making it look like they had a plan. And then, bit by bit, the temperature on the match dialed up. Vinicius Jr. started doing Vinicius things. That one moment when he tried to hit a shot from 25 out, yeah, it got deflected into harmlessness, but you could feel the intention shifting. And that's how this match moved. Not with clarity, but with mood. The mood shifted, slowly. Juventus had their say again around the half-hour mark. Conceição had a header that looked like it was meant to trouble someone, but it barely disturbed Courtois' nap. And yet you couldn't shake the feeling that Real were going to do something reckless soon. Because that's what they do. They hover. They lull you. And then they strike. The best chance of the half? That was all Valverde again. About 30 yards out, steps into it, rifles a rocket that would have shattered windows if it hadn't been for Michel Di Gregorio's heroic left hand. That save? Poster-worthy. Save of the round material. He flung himself like a man possessed, and that hand was just enough. Honestly, if you paused the game there, you'd think maybe he had struck a deal with someone upstairs. It was too good. Just before the whistle, Trent Alexander-Arnold whipped one across the box so fast and low it might have been trying to saw ankles off. The Juve defense looked like they were trying to remember how feet work, but no one got a toe on it. Another moment. Another, almost. At halftime, it was 0-0, but not boring 0-0. Not a nothing's happening 0-0. This was the kind of 0-0 that felt like something was brewing, like the music was building. Like the monster was just beneath the surface of the lake, and you knew it was going to jump out in the second half. The game wasn't static. It was simmering. You could feel it in the way Bellingham started to find more space. You could feel it in the way Xabi Alonso didn't blink, just stood there chewing on whatever eternal thought he was thinking. The kind of look that says, we'll get there. And so we did. Because as soon as they came out for the second half, the mood snapped into something else. Valverde right away nearly scores. Again. Bellingham dishes him the ball like a butler handing off fine china, and Valverde hits a strike that shaves the paint off the far post. It wasn't just close. It was threatening. You could hear Juventus thinking, oh, it started. And oh, it had started. 53 minutes in, bang. Gonzalo Garcia, who'd barely been in the match for the first half, suddenly exploded into relevance like someone who just remembered they were auditioning for Real Madrid's future. It all came from Trent Alexander-Arnold. And listen, if there's one man who can look like he's on a beach walk and then suddenly whip in a cross that defies physics, it's him. That ball he sent in? You could frame it. You could build a church around it. It curled like it had a soul, and Garcia rose like he had springs in his boots and anger in his forehead. Boom. Header. Net. Nil. No chance for Gregorio, no chance for Juventus. Just pure inevitability. And then everything changed. Real Madrid stopped pretending. The elegant play was out the window. They started hunting. Like actual pack hunting. Bellingham got more physical. Tchouaméni started popping up all over the midfield like a recurring nightmare. Vinicius Jr. started to stretch time and space every time he got the ball. There's one pass he whips in with the outside of his foot. It doesn't lead to anything, sure. But the technique? Disrespectful. Audacious. The kind of thing that says, we're winning this, and I'm having fun doing it. But here's the twist. Juventus didn't collapse. They didn't fold like a beach chair under a toddler. They came at Real like a team that knew they had 20 minutes to save their season. Conceição comes close with a low curler that Courtois has to really work for. That's the kind of save where a normal keeper pushes it into danger. Courtois? He absorbs it, like it was always going to him. By the 70-minute mark, the game had entered chaos mode. Substitutions started flying. Arda Güler off, Luka Modric on, and suddenly everything smells of nostalgia. Modric with the armband, ghosting into midfield like he never left. The guy moves like a memory. And just when you think that's as much romanticism as the game can handle, Mbappe gets ready to come on. Finally. After illness, after the bench, after the waiting, the camera zooms in, and it's like a Marvel hero showing up in the third act. The stadium roars. You know you're in a Real Madrid fever dream when Gonzalo Garcia scores a bullet header and then gets subbed off for Kylian Mbappe. But then, despite the star-studded madness, the game becomes all about one man, Michele Gregorio. The Juventus goalkeeper becomes a one-man wall. He denies Valverde again. He shuts down a Tchouaméni low curler like it's nothing. At this point, you're not even hoping for him to stop goals. You're just hoping he doesn't get asked to do taxes mid-match. That's how much they were relying on him. And Real could smell the second. Oh, they wanted it. Modric slips Vinicius through and the step-over he pulls off? Glorious. No finish to match it, of course, because football is cruel like that. But the aesthetics? 5 stars. Juventus were hanging by threads at this point, and not fancy threads. We're talking cobwebs. Time was slipping, bodies were cramping, and still, they had that glimmer of hope. Final 10 minutes, Juventus throw the kitchen sink. Randall Kolo Muani, remember him? Charges into the box, draws contact, flops dramatically, and gets waved away. It's the kind of penalty appeal that makes even the fans look down in embarrassment. Desperation was their final tactic, and so it ends 1-0. But the story isn't about a scoreline. It's about a match that slowly caught fire, burned bright, and left us blinking in the aftermath. It was Real Madrid at their most restrained and their most dangerous. It was Juventus trying to conjure a punch they no longer had in their locker. The second half gave us the goal, the drama, the saves, the superstars. But more than anything, it gave us that feeling. The one where you realize the big clubs, the storied ones, they don't just win. They endure. They find ways. They bring on the next man, and the next, and somehow, some way, they get across the line. Let's talk about these two teams, because they didn't just share a pitch. They staged a full-blown football opera, each singing their parts with different instruments. Real Madrid first. What's left to say about a club that could field 2 starting 11s and both would be terrifying? But this wasn't just about depth. It was about tone. There's something unnerving about how calmly Real Madrid play, even when it's ugly. The first half, they were uninspired, almost indifferent. And then they pressed the button. They always seem to have a button. It's not just talent, it's the orchestration. Xabi Alonso, standing on the touchline, looked like a man controlling the weather. He doesn't shout. He gestures like he's sketching tactical diagrams in the air. And his team responds. They don't play beautiful football for 90 minutes. They play decisive football for 3-minute bursts, and that's enough. You blink, and you're down a goal. You blink again, and Modric is weaving past your midfield while Vinicius eats grass on the wing. Real Madrid's spine is steel-wrapped silk. Courtois in goal is basically a denial machine. Tchouaméni anchors the midfield like it's an anchor made of diamond. Bellingham, even when not fully shining, always looks involved, always inches away from rewriting the match story. But the real thing about this Real Madrid team is that they rotate without losing rhythm. Arda Güler starts. Garcia scores. Modric comes on and you suddenly hear a collective sigh across the field like, oh right, that guy. Then Mbappe steps in like a mic drop moment. Who else can do this? Who else has this kind of cheat code football at their disposal? And yet, Juventus didn't die. Let's be honest, they weren't supposed to be in this one for long. Paper thin compared to Madrid's golden roster, carrying the burden of recent collapses and a backline that always looks a couple touches away from a disaster. And still, they fought. Juventus played like a club trying to remind the world they matter. This wasn't flair. It wasn't elegance. It was stubborn, gritty football. Yildiz and Kolo Muani were sparks of chaos in a world of structure. They were fun, erratic, brave. Even when the goal went in, Juventus didn't cave. They didn't go defensive. They didn't go frantic. They walked the tightrope. Even at 1-0 down, they refused to play victim. And this is where their keeper, Michel Di Gregorio, comes in. More on him later, but let's just say Juventus weren't just defending a scoreline, they were defending his legacy. It's also worth mentioning how much Juventus missed their midfield showing up with clarity. Locatelli worked hard, but was dragged into chasing shadows more than orchestrating attacks. And when they took off Yildiz at 72 minutes, that felt like a crime of passion, like pulling out the only candle in a blackout. Still, there's no shame in this. Juventus in this match looked like a side rebuilding with courage. They had moments. Real Madrid had control. The difference is subtle, but the results are not. This match was a masterclass in how two teams can be evenly matched in energy, but galaxies apart in execution. Juventus had belief. Real Madrid had belief and blueprints. They had multiple plans, and every one of them involved someone stepping up with timing that feels almost mythological. This game, it wasn't an even fight, but it wasn't a walkover either. Juventus made Madrid feel something. That's already a win for a club that's been trying to find itself in the mirror lately. Two teams. One story. Real Madrid wrote it with elegance. Juventus underlined it with effort. Now let's strip the paint off and get to the core. Individual performances. The messy, the majestic, the mysterious. Because this wasn't just teams on a pitch. This was actors in a play. And some of them delivered soliloquies. Start with Michel Di Gregorio. You have to. You're morally obligated. Because he wasn't just Juventus' best player. He was the glue holding their paper-thin hopes together. From the opening half hour, he was dealing with madness. Valverde from 30 yards? Handled. Bellingham dancing into the box? Saved. Tchouaméni low drive? Stopped. Vinicius chaos? Smothered. It was like watching a man bail water out of a sinking boat using only a coffee mug, and somehow keeping it afloat. The only one he couldn't stop was Garcia's header, and honestly, that would have needed 3 hands and a divine intervention. Now contrast that with Thibaut Courtois. The Real Madrid giant didn't have to perform as many miracles, but when Juventus did get through, he was there. That stop against Conceicão's curling effort? Textbook. His positioning is like jazz, unpredictable but always exactly right. Courtois has this infuriating habit of not looking busy but always being perfect. Goalkeepers dream of days like that. Di Gregorio survives them. Courtois curates them. Now Gonzalo Garcia. What do you even say? First half? Nearly invisible. Second half? He introduces himself with a header that could end a marriage. Trent Alexander-Arnold curls in a beauty, and Garcia says thank you very much, and slams it into the net like a guy who just remembered he's auditioning for Ballon d'Or 2074. One chance. One goal. That's not just finishing. That's ruthlessness. He was Real Madrid's ghost in the first half, and then became their ghostwriter in the second. Speaking of Trent, what a night. He had a moment early where he looked like he left his focus in the hotel mini-fridge, nearly gifting Juventus a goal. But he recovered. Oh, did he recover? That assist? It's the kind of ball you could follow home like a lost dog. Trent has that special talent of making chaos look deliberate. His runs are sometimes nonsensical, his defending questionable, but when he gets time and space, the delivery is cruel. Federico Valverde? Tireless. Unyielding. His name was written all over the match. He wore the captain's armband like he'd been born with it. 2 nearly goals. Constant industry, leadership that doesn't shout. It hums. He might not have scored, but you felt him in every blade of grass. Jude Bellingham had a weird one. He wasn't electric. He wasn't dominant. But he was present, like a shadow you can't shake. He missed tackles, yes. He got a yellow card, yes. But every time Real needed direction, he pointed. Literally. Figuratively. He's 21 going on 35 and still manages to make midfield look like a sandbox. Vinicius Jr.? A fever dream. He's that player who makes defenders lie awake at night wondering why their legs feel like noodles. No goal but the step over, the outside of the boot cross, the runs that split open the timeline. He was the art. The messy, glorious, infuriating art. Modric? A cameo, sure, but even his cameos feel scripted by the gods. He comes on, immediately starts threading passes like he's mending tapestries. He didn't need to be fast. He just needed to be. That's the Luka Modric experience. Mbappe? Barely on. No big moments. But the moment he stepped on the pitch, the mood changed. He's a gravitational force. His presence alone made Juventus defenders shrink 2 inches. And poor Kenan Yildiz. He tried. He twisted and turned. Took a few shots, made a few sparks, but then he got subbed off before the 75th minute, and with him, Juventus' bite left the building. A strange decision, one that will probably be chewed over by analysts and armchair pundits for the next week. And finally, Antonio Rudiger. That man plays defense like he's solving crimes. He's everywhere, all the time, and always slightly unhinged. There was a moment late on where Colomwani ran into him like he was a brick wall, and Rudiger didn't even flinch. He might be made of secrets and rebar. So many players, so many little stories. But in the end, it's Garcia's name on the score sheet, Di Gregorio's name in the lights, and Real Madrid's name in the quarterfinals. This has been Across the Pitch. Over and out.